The woman sits alone in a restaurant. She is dressed elegantly, looking no different from any other guest. Then her eyes suddenly land on a little girl across from her. The girl notices her, but instead of being afraid, she stares right back on purpose. She even gives her a slightly defiant look. The woman says nothing and quietly finishes her meal. When she finally gets up to leave, she deliberately walks past the girl. She raises her hand and gently bumps into her. The ice cream is knocked out of the girl's hands and falls to the ground, but the woman doesn't even look back. Yet this seemingly elegant woman had slit a politician's throat just hours earlier. Even more disturbing, it wasn't out of anger or hatred. She did it because she found it entertaining. Her name is Villanelle, an elegant woman with a playful, unpredictable temperament, and an extremely dangerous professional assassin. After completing the job, she doesn't hide in the shadows. Instead, she goes shopping and returns to her apartment in Paris. A pink coat, silk blouse, and flawless makeup. She looks nothing like someone who just killed a man. She looks more like someone coming back from a date. That's what makes Villanelle so terrifying. Her cruelty isn't hidden behind an ugly appearance. It exists alongside beauty, humor, and a childlike sense of play. Back at her apartment, after putting away her tools, she begins admiring herself in the mirror.
Beautiful.
To mess with her handler Constantine, she stages her apartment like a crime scene. Pills are scattered across the table. A bottle lies tipped over nearby. She lies motionless on the couch. When Constantine walks in, the silence feels wrong, but he is already used to her childish games.
I got you!
Yes.
A bit, admit it, a tiny bit.
A tiny bit, yes.
He hands Villanelle a stack of cash, payment for the assassination. Then Constantine brings her the next assignment. It's urgent. It's due tomorrow. The location is Tuscany, Italy. The target is an older man. On the surface, Villanelle seems indifferent. But once she's on a mission, she becomes precise and highly efficient. She changes into shorts and boots designed for mobility. While the guards aren't watching, she climbs a drainage pipe into the building. As she opens a closet, she suddenly hears footsteps outside. A guard enters and notices something slightly off about the closet door. He searches the room but finds nothing. He eventually closes the closet and leaves. Because Villanelle is already hidden inside a suitcase, anything around her can become cover or a tool. Once it's safe, she changes clothes and blends into a gathering downstairs. The target is spending time warmly with his grandson. A normal assassin would wait for isolation, but Villanelle changes her plan after seeing them together. Because she isn't just trying to complete a job. She wants to turn killing into a performance she directs herself. She follows the boy upstairs and convinces him they can prank his grandfather. The boy innocently helps her lure the grandfather to the doorway. Villanelle then locks the boy in the bathroom. She tells him to stay quiet so the prank will work. To the child, it's just a game. But to the audience, it already feels chilling. When the man walks in, he has no idea he is in danger. He thinks the beautiful woman is part of a surprise from his grandson, but it's not seduction. The next second, she drives a poisoned hairpin into his eye. Clean, precise, no hesitation. Her killings always carry a sense of performance. After the job, she even leaves the hairpin behind and writes down a name. It isn't a mistake, it's a provocation. For someone who lives in the shadows, invisibility is both protection and a kind of torment. So leaving a trace is her way of declaring, this wasn't an accident or a random killing. I was here. But Villanelle doesn't yet realize that while she treats killing like a performance, somewhere in British intelligence, someone has already begun noticing her through another assassination case. That person is Eve. On the surface, Eve is just a low-level security officer. She spends her days in an office, sorting files and following orders. But what truly interests her has nothing to do with procedure. It's why people kill, especially killers who are calm, intelligent, and emotionally unreadable. She isn't simply afraid of them. She wants to understand them. And that curiosity has slowly crossed a line, turning into something far more dangerous: obsession. It was supposed to be a day off. Eve hadn't even had breakfast when her boss urgently called her back to work. By the time she got to the briefing room, everyone was already seated. Frank, her superior, immediately threw out a few sarcastic remarks about her being late. But Eve barely registered the embarrassment. The case file on the table instantly took over her full attention. A Russian politician, Kedrin, had been assassinated during a visit to Austria. At the time, he was walking down the street with his girlfriend, Kasia. There were no gunshots, no chase, no visible struggle. The attacker simply approached him and, in a split second, cut his carotid artery. By the time Kasia reacted, Kedrin was already bleeding heavily. Within a minute, he collapsed to the ground and never got back up. The strangest part of the case was that Kasia was the only witness. Yet she couldn't even clearly describe what the attacker looked like. But Eve's first reaction wasn't fear. It was excitement. She even blurted out that the killer was impressive. The room went silent. Everyone stared at her like she was insane. In their eyes, her reaction was completely inappropriate. Then her boss continued. To protect Kasia, Interpol had transferred her to a hospital in London under secret protection. Eve's job was to ensure Kasia's safety. Before the meeting ended, Eve couldn't help herself and made a bet with her boss.
20 quid, it was a woman. Sorry? Sorry, nothing.
It sounded like a joke, but it was actually the first time Eve openly voiced her instinct. She believed that approaching a male politician on the street, a woman would be less likely to draw attention than a man. A man would trigger immediate suspicion from security. But a seemingly harmless woman could walk closer without anyone even noticing. But after hearing her, both supervisors simply turned and walked away. Seeing her judgment dismissed so easily, Eve's need to prove herself only grew stronger. To validate her theory, she even began reconstructing the attack. She picked up a knife and traced it along the inside of her thigh. She was trying to understand how the killer could strike fatally without raising any alarm. For the first time, it became clear to the audience that Eve wasn't doing this job just for duty. She was genuinely drawn to the danger itself. Soon after, Kasia, the only witness to Kedron's murder, was moved to a hospital in London. Eve finally got the chance to question her in person. Kasia had just watched her boyfriend die and was still in a state of extreme trauma. But Eve wasn't there just to comfort her. She cared more about the killer's height, gait, voice, positioning, and approach, because to Eve, every detail could be a psychological fingerprint left behind by the killer. Finally, Kasia recalled a crucial detail. She thought she had seen the attacker's side profile. It wasn't a man. It looked more like a woman. That detail almost confirmed Eve's suspicion. But the more accurate she was, the faster danger closed in. Because Villanelle had already received a new order, she had to eliminate the witness before Kasia could be officially questioned. Constantine reminded her to stage it as a suicide this time and avoid unnecessary traces. But Villanelle was never someone who fully followed instructions. When she arrived at the hospital to carry out the job, fate pushed her and Eve into the same space at the same time. In the restroom, Eve was fixing her hair in front of the mirror. Villanelle walked in and saw a stranger. She could have just left, but she stopped. She looked at Eve's curly hair, as if something in her memory had been triggered. Before leaving, she quietly said,
Wear it down.
It was the first time Villanelle had ever directly interfered in Eve's personal space. She didn't yet know who Eve was, but she already instinctively wanted to change her and remember her. And Eve had no idea either that the woman who had just passed her was the very assassin she was hunting. When Eve walked out of the restroom, she immediately sensed the hospital corridor was too quiet. As she approached the ward, what she saw made her freeze completely. Kasia was dead. A nurse was dead. Security guards lay in pools of blood as well. Luckily, her colleague Dom had stepped out to buy chocolate and narrowly escaped. The scene inside the room made it clear Villanelle had not followed Constantine's instructions at all. She was supposed to stage a suicide, kill quietly, and leave without attention. But after that brief encounter with Eve in the restroom, something clearly stirred her emotionally. Eve's soft curly hair seemed to have touched something in her memory she rarely confronted. It disrupted her usually controlled state and left her strangely energized. So the mission was no longer just about completing a job. It turned into an emotional release she could no longer contain. She didn't hide the scene or stage a suicide. Meanwhile, Eve was immediately investigated after the witness attack. Her boss Frank fired her on the spot for unauthorized interference and mishandling the witness. Her colleague Bill, who defended her, also lost his job. Within a single day, she went from an overlooked intelligence worker to someone completely discarded by the system. That night, Eve returned home completely drained and in a low place emotionally. But just then, Carolyn from MI6 showed up at her door. Carolyn told her she had been secretly tracking a female assassin for 2 years. The killer had been linked to cases across 10 different countries. Carolyn was impressed by Eve's sharp instincts in analyzing the case and her ability to work independently, so she invited Eve to join her. A covert unit dedicated to tracking the female assassin operating in the shadows of the international system. Eve's life was about to change again, and her story with Villanelle was only just beginning. What makes Killing Eve truly stand out is this: it's never just about a righteous agent hunting a twisted killer. What makes the first episode unsettling is that it shows Eve and Villanelle are not complete opposites. Villanelle treats killing like a game and a performance. Eve treats hunting the killer as both her job and her purpose. But once that sense of purpose turns into obsession, she starts crossing lines. She knows her actions can provoke witnesses, but she can't stop herself. She knows she no longer has authorization, but she keeps pushing forward anyway. She knows the killer is dangerous, yet feels a rush every time she gets closer. That's what makes this show so unsettling. It's not just that it portrays an elegant and ruthless female assassin. It also turns the camera toward the seemingly normal investigator, making us realize that danger isn't always something that comes rushing out of the dark. Sometimes it lives inside what someone is best at, most passionate about, and most eager to prove. Villanelle needs to be seen. Eve needs to prove that she can see her. One leaves traces through killing, the other searches for meaning through pursuit. When those two desires collide, the cat-and-mouse game is no longer just about predator and prey. It becomes two people reflecting the parts of themselves they refuse to admit. You think Eve is the one catching Villanelle, but with every step closer, she's also being changed by her. The most dangerous thing about human nature isn't necessarily evil. It's meeting someone who ignites something inside you. From that moment on, reason starts stepping aside. Rules start to feel meaningless, and someone once calm can slowly walk into a depth they never imagined, just for that feeling of excitement. In the next episode, Eve officially joins Carolyn's covert investigation unit. But the deeper she digs, the more something feels off. A face captured on surveillance footage brings her back to the woman in the hospital restroom, the stranger who told her to wear her hair down. It might very well be the assassin she has been hunting all along. Stranger still, whenever Eve thinks about Villanelle, Villanelle is also looking at photos of the hospital nurse. That brief encounter has sparked her curiosity as well. From this moment on, the hunt is no longer one-sided. It becomes a mutual psychological game of cat and mouse between two women.